Hey, this is Joel Duff, and this is This Week in Creationism, episode number 74. This is where we take a look at the recent headlines in the world of creationism over the past couple weeks. So, what do we have in store this time? We've got some more commotion about the chimp-human percent similarity stuff that's going around. We'll talk a little bit about Nathaniel Jensen and Answers in Genesis. Once again, why so many species? How did species arrive after the flood? AIG is manufacturing stuff at an astonishing rate. I mean, they're just becoming a regular factory. And I'm not just talking about of information, of actual materials, for their ever-growing theme parks. So let's talk about that a little bit and a whole bunch of other things too. We got that coming up next. All right, first stop on our trip here around the world of creationism, just published today. I'm recording this on June 18th, 2025. And at the top of the Answers in Genesis website is this article, Responding to Biologos Opponents and Their Tactics. And it's an article, as you can see the picture there, about the Grand Canyon. And specifically, Andrew Snelling is addressing an article published in Biologos, I think in 2016, so a number of years ago now, by four authors who are Christians, who are in science, who wrote this book that's over here on the other side, The Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth. And this has been a real, I'll say, a thorn in the side of Answers in Genesis for quite a while. I found it actually interesting that this came up today. Once again, they just can't let it go, which tells me something very important. It tells me that this book is still selling. And actually, I know that's the case because I'm a co-author. I'm an author of a couple chapters from this book and was very much involved in the creation of this book from the very beginning. And so one of those four authors on that article at Biologos is me. And Andrew Snelling is once again responding to this book and its effects. It's the long legs that it has had. I'm sure the reason he's responding yet again is because Answers in Genesis must be getting feedback. They must be hearing from pastors. They must be going out and hearing that people are reading this book and asking them questions about it. And so they feel like they have to continue to respond. Just like my next story will be another thing that Answers in Genesis has to continually respond to over and over and over again. All right. So anyway, hey, great book, Grand Canyon, Monument to an Ancient Earth, still available at the Grand Canyon bookstore and your other favorite places to buy books. I may or may not do a more extensive response to this particular article. So far, I think this is just part one of what will be two parts. So I'll wait to see if there's any I'll wait to see if there's any substance in the second article. Let's put it that way, because I didn't find a whole lot of substance in this one. Mostly it was just complaining about the authors and just trying to, basically undermine the authors of the article in order to hopefully dissuade people from reading the book. That's essentially what this article is for. Answers in Genesis are like, hey, don't look over there. You don't need to read that. Don't pay no attention to that book you might have heard of by these, Christian geologists. Nathaniel Jensen he's come out of the woodwork here after really a year and a half of not hearing much from him. He's been working on a book. And now that book is published, he's kind of supporting that by writing a series of articles for Answers in Genesis, which are semi-related to that particular book. This one I've already responded to. This is my article over here. This is my YouTube video. Does Nathaniel Jensen deserve attention or not? And, the question mark actually tells you the answer to that, which is no, not really. There's nothing really new in these articles that he hasn't already published in the past. It's sort of just this is a round of getting himself out there and promoting the book. So let's move on. In a related item, if the earth is young, why are there so many species? And this is something that I've once again been drawn back into discussing in just the last 2 weeks on this channel. In this case, this is Karina Altman, who we'll also be mentioning in a moment in another story. And Karina Altman is the zookeeper for Answers in Genesis, and she does a number of talks at the Creation Museum and I think at the Ark Encounter. Actually, she's more at the Ark Encounter than the Creation Museum. And so she has this article here about rapid speciation happening after Noah's flood and how all the different animals radiated into and speciated there. And I just recently, just in the last couple of days, responded to a video by Todd Wood in which he was talking about this very topic of speciation, or where did diversity of life come from after the flood in the young earth creationist model. And the way Karina Altman describes it and Todd Wood are not exactly in sync, in the sense that what she's doing here is just providing one example after another of, oh, look, see, there's those finches, or there's some lizards on this particular island that have been shown to have speciated within the last couple generations or within the last 100 years of observations. And that's super rapid speciation compared to the foil, which is Darwinian evolution. Like, they say it takes hundreds of thousands of generations, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years to create species. But we can use our observational science and show that and see that species are being formed relatively quickly. And so by giving a litany of examples, the suggestion is that maybe that's the norm and not the abnormal rate of speciation. And so if that is reality, that many species can be formed very, very quickly, then maybe that explains animals hopping off the ark like 2 canines and then becoming 35 species of canines within a very short period of time. And I suggested in this video right here, my response to Todd Wood, that what Todd Wood was, and again, I'm putting some words in his mouth, and maybe I'm not exactly reading him right here, but I do think there's a sense there in which he's saying, like, those, I'll have to ask him whether he agrees with me or not, but I think he would recognize, I'll leave Todd Wood out of it. I'm just going to say that examples of rapid speciation are definitely the exception and not the rule, right? Most organisms are not speciating that quickly. We don't have observation. If organisms really did speciate that quickly, we'd have lots more evidence. Karina Altman wouldn't have a difficult time coming up with 4 or 5 examples. She'd have thousands of examples to choose from, right? Because it would be the normal way that we would observe organisms changing in terms of the rapidity of their changes. And that's not what we observe. And so this doesn't seem to be a very good example for young earth creationists to use. Like, hey, look at that. That thing speciates really fast. Hence, all species could have, like thousands of species could have formed right after the flood. It doesn't necessarily follow. I don't think it follows at all. And I think other creationists are looking for other ways to explain rapid speciation after the flood that doesn't incorporate just modern day observations of, hey, it could happen. What could happen is not necessarily what has happened. Okay, the aforementioned Karina Altman, the zookeeper. And she has been awarded another recognition by Animal People's Forum and I think the National Zoological Society of America. And she had previously been recognized for one of her papers, and now she's been recognized again, voted best paper of the year. And of course, Ken Ham writes an article about how this shows that young earth creationists are doing science. Now that research that she did research, and it was essentially educational pedagogy, or how to deliver science content to a public audience. And they were looking at changing the wording and so forth on different signage at the Ark Encounter at their zoo, especially with respect to reptiles, which is why she's holding this snake right here. And so, had a little paper in this particular journal and was recognized for that. And now she's been recognized as like that was the best paper of the year. And Ken Ham, rightly is proud of one of his employees receiving an award. I don't think that this particular research has really anything to do with young earth creationism or, proving anything that the Ark encounter wants to say. So yes, Ken Ham's right that people in his organization can do research, whether it's research that leads to answers that I think people are really looking for from Answers in Genesis. That's not where you would go, right? With her research. But I don't want to take anything away from her award. Maybe it sounds like I am. What I am saying is that Ken Ham is overplaying his hand in terms of like, look, we have people doing research here, giving the impression that, yeah, they're researching, creation science, trying to understand the origins of organisms and all that other stuff, how science relates to the Bible. That's not at all what she is doing. All right. I had mentioned before that Answers in Genesis sometimes gets themselves in a bind, right? Their followers are very much prone to, let's just say they're prone to following misinformation and stories that sound really good, and they want to believe because of the global flood is a large component of a young earth creationist worldview. The idea of finding Noah's Ark or remnants of Noah's Ark or proof that the Ark existed at a particular location kind of feels like it would be the smoking gun evidence that would convince everybody of the reality of Noah in terms of Noah's flood. And so there's just such a great temptation for young earth creationists to want to gravitate to any report of such a thing. And so Answers in Genesis consistently has to respond to people that write to them or other articles that are out there in the press that they can see that and they recognize that their followers are probably going to find attractive, and they basically have to debunk them. And so yet another article, Ken Ham pointing out that once again, another site for the Ark has been said to have been found, but there's really no evidence for that, at least that they would consider. And considering what slim evidence sometimes they use for some of the things that they want to support, it means the evidence must be terrible for the Ark having been found. And yes, it is. It's highly suspect. And they've recognized. Okay, another article. This is one of the articles that inspired me to do another recent video I made, Creationist and Climate Change, talking about how young earth creationists frame the climate age discussion or climate change discussion. And this article is yet another one kind of similar to the Noah's Ark one. Chemtrails, cloud seeding. She's going to point out that those things are bogus stories, right? And yet, once again, many of their followers have gravitated toward chemtrail conspiracy theories and so forth. And so she goes through and she's going to basically debunk a number of different conspiracy theories that many creationists find themselves attracted to. But of course, she's going to get to climate change, and she is going to say that there is some aspects of climate change that are real, but that's where she's going to shift her focus to but some things, that the consensus view, can be wrong in some cases. It's not wrong in these cases, but in this last case, the consensus view is probably wrong. And so I don't directly address this particular article in this video about creationist and climate change. I'm more looking at Ken Ham's book, Climate Change and Kids. It's basically a kid's book explaining climate change from what he calls a biblical perspective or a biblical worldview of climate change. So go see that video for that extended discussion of the climate. All right, this is completely unrelated to Answers in Genesis. It's just, on my social media. I've seen this particular post multiple times in a number of different groups. It's kind of a classic design argument, but in this case, it's yet another short blurb that's full of errors, full of mistakes. I think it raises intriguing questions, and I've thought about making an entire video just about this particular ant. Because I think we can ask some really interesting questions about the origins of those things. But in this case, I just want to address the fact that there's just misinformation involved. God's amazing animals. And then it says here, the ant that looks like a spider. It's actually the other way around. It's a spider that's looking like an ant. Although in this picture with the green leaf here, which that's the one that's part of this social media post, that really doesn't look like a spider to me. It looks more like a kind of looks like a spider trying to act like a scorpion, not like an ant. I had to do quite a bit of searching through Google Images in order to locate this particular spider because honestly, I thought it was AI. All right, I thought it was made up. I don't really trust most images anymore on social media. So I searched and I finally found what spider it is. It is not a spider from the Miramiranchi. I'm probably mispronouncing that particular genus. It's a different genus altogether, and it's not considered an ant mimic genus either. And yet that's the picture that was used for this post in order to talk about ant mimic spiders, which they call ants that look like spiders, except that they're spiders that look like ants. All right, so it's just like somebody just threw this stuff together without doing any research in order to sound like, wow, I've made a really profound point here. Obviously, if this thing is a spider and it looks like an ant, then it must be intelligently and purposely designed. How else could it look just like some other type of organism? So what's on the yellow right there? That's actually on the surface of the seat of my lawnmower in my backyard. All right, here in Ohio. And that right there, probably, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but it might look like an ant. And if you saw it without really being aware of ant mimic spiders, you almost certainly would think it's an ant. It's walking around acting like an ant. Let me show you a little bit bigger image of it. So once I blow it up, this actually is from the Miramiranchi genus. See the last name or the specific epithet on that scientific name, Formicaria, right? That's often a word associated with ants, but this isn't an ant. That's a spider. All right, so look at that. It has 8 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 instead of 6. Just like over here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. The front legs are highly modified here in a way to look kind of like a scorpion. And then the abdomen, all right, which spiders don't really have the 3 parts, right? But they have sort of partitioned their body to look like the parts of an ant. That's why this one doesn't really look like an ant. It doesn't have the 3 parts, and the front legs look different, face and all that. Whereas this one has sort of a 3-part body, and then it's got these little mandibles on the front for capturing prey, and it's got 8 legs. And sometimes it holds up, some ant mimics hold up their front legs as if they're little antenna. All right, so they're using those 2 extra appendages that spiders have to pretend like they're antenna on a spider. And they tend to walk in the style of an ant. All right, so behavior-wise, they're acting like an ant, and they also have the appearance from a distance, especially if you go back to this point, you don't really notice it is. And so birds and other things that don't really care for ants, but would be perfectly willing to eat a spider, avoid this, right? And that would be the function of mimicry, right? Is, well, both to sneak up on a predator who might not care if you're an ant, but more so probably to hide itself or prevent itself from being eaten by predators themselves. All right, so lots of interesting things that could be said about the origins of this, like how does a spider learn the behaviors of an ant and begin to look like an ant? And from a young Earth creationist point, of course, they're going to say, well, how could that have evolved? That's a very interesting question about how those characteristics could evolve. But young Earth creationists also have the question of why would God make spiders that look like ants? Especially since these ants are predators. These spiders, right? They're carnivores. What did they do in the original creation? Is this their perfect way, or is this somehow a maladaptation? There's all kinds of things that you can ask about. Essentially the same question you have about parasites, parasitic organisms. But let's move on. Ken Ham. This post, this is actually probably about 2 weeks ago now. This week, our Answers in Genesis digital fabrication team at the design studio. Answers in Genesis is becoming a large company, right? If it's a nonprofit organization, but they have a whole bunch of different subdivisions now that take on a lot of different tasks that generate a lot of income. They just started production on the doors for what will be one of the largest indoor models of the first century Jerusalem. That's one of their latest things, is they're building a whole building, and inside that building will be this 3D reconstruction of Jerusalem. So they're creating an astonishing 25,000 miniature doors for this massive model that require thousands of different buildings and homes. There are many different kinds of doors that have been designed in 3D software. They'll be printed on one of our 113 resin printers. I told you, they're becoming a factory, right? They're a production facility. Once they're printed, we need to be cleaned and then cured with UV light. From there, they'll need to be painted, assembled in a massive 2,000 square foot model. Photos of some of our 3D printers and rendering of what the scale model will look like. He then shows those, which I will share with you. So here you go. And this would be in their new headquarters. Remember, they bought one of the former North American headquarters of Toyota, which is just off the freeway in just over the river from Cincinnati in Kentucky. And so they have a multi-million-dollar building that they've been retrofitting. And here's one of the things they're doing with it. So here is a whole series of 3D printers. They're being utilized for production in what eventually will become this extremely large diorama, essentially. So there's some of the 3D printed stuff. And so I've been telling you that Answers in Genesis is a multimedia, conglomerate. They have the theme parks, they've got video channels, right? They have their own TV stuff, and lots of other media that's going on. So tons of production going on there. And to the point where they're making a lot of their own stuff. And then just so we don't have to spend our time talking just about Answers in Genesis, I keep on saying months after months now that ICR has been incredibly boring. That's Institute for Creation Research in Texas. And it's just I go to their site and I'm like, there's got to be something here I can talk about. And I come away with nah, none of this it doesn't reach the bar. It's just not noteworthy in the world of creationism. So I finally found something. It's not much, but it kind of allowed me to say a few things about the differences between these organizations in their apologetic form of outreach. Right? How are they reaching out? How are they communicating? And so they've just done their 100th episode of their podcast. And in that podcast, they have a long discussion about why do we do creation events, right? They send out speakers to churches and conferences and do creation seminars in a kind of the traditional way that in the 80s, the 90s, especially in the 90s, really big thing. Answers in Genesis, when they finally got going in 1997, into the early 2000s, I'll say the first decade of 2000, right? And Creation Ministries International, they all have had a speakers bureau, and they're constantly looking for places they can go and give talks. But Answers in Genesis has scaled way back. They have gotten rid of most of their speakers, and they rarely do events. I mean, Ken Ham does a couple. They have a couple other people that will go to really big events, right? Some 3 or 4 day thing, super creation conference or something. But they don't go to a lot of individual churches anymore. They're more focused on what I just showed you, which is they have multimedia. They can do podcasts, they can do their TV shows and all this other stuff. And basically they're saying we don't really need to go out and have that, I'll say, that personal touch of meeting people, outside. I don't know if you can say they've grown too big, but they've made a conscious decision really not to do that so much. I know it's expensive to do because, physically you have to go there, accommodations, all that other stuff. Although they usually charge places. I mean, places often will pay them to come. It's not, it's not just out the goodwill of Answers in Genesis all the time. But in this particular video, ICR is emphasizing the importance of them personally going out and like meeting with people, having conferences, and then talking afterwards. All right. And then sharing books and all that stuff, kind of in a very traditional way. And so that's something that they are still, they still have a large focus on, and sort of like filling the void left by Answers in Genesis, because there still are a lot of churches and other homeschool groups and so forth that want to have a speaker talking about origins and, biology and science in general. And so ICR, I think, is sort of trying to kind of like fill that niche. And honestly, they need some niche to fill because they're completely outflanked by other creationists in most other ways, at least in my opinion. All right. That brings us to the recent flurry of younger creationist articles talking about a recent sequencing of the chimp, well, actually not just chimps, but of primate or great ape genomes, in which complete, or we'll say very nearly complete, entire genomes have been sequenced, which allow us to do different kinds of comparisons between genomes. I don't want to go through all the details because I've done another video on that. I've done a couple videos on this, and other people have done videos on which I'm going to show you in just a moment. But I just want to make you aware, if you just watched This Week in Creationism, that they're making a big deal about how, the chimp genome is not really 99% similar to humans. It's more like only 85% similar. And so that seems shocking, right? And I and others have talked about the fact that it's not really that shocking. It's not actually a surprise. It's an accounting thing, how you count the differences. And again, I don't want to go into all those details. I'll just say that here's ICR on their front page. Chimp genome only 75% similar. I don't really know where they got the 75% number there. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but nonetheless, if it's 15 or 20% different. What they don't do is, just really quickly, they don't do the apples to apples comparison, which I happen to know that there's going to be a big video coming out in the very near future by the channel Gutsy Gibbon, who will be sharing a bunch of apples to apples comparisons using the same methodology, right? The same statistical method to calculate the genome similarity of a chimpanzee and a human that comes up with this 85% number. And you're going to compare that with chimps to bonobos and chimps and humans to humans. And I did that in my video too. There are humans that are only 90% similar to other humans using the method here, which it's kind of like, once you know that, you're like, it's not as impressive as it sounds to say like, oh, well, everyone believed it was 99% similar, but it's really only 85% similar. But it's using a different method of analysis. I don't want to belabor this point. I would say if you want to know a lot more, go see one of these two videos. Shocking result? No, not really. Context matters. That's the thing about, like, hey, apples to apples comparison. And I do a really rough comparison in this video, but Gutsy Gibbon has come out with this first video over here. Okay, how similar are humans and chimpanzees? And she goes through the original research paper and the supplemental materials of the big paper about the genomes of great apes, and gets down into the nitty gritty of some of the differences between different apes, not just chimps and humans, but a bigger, broader overview of that data. And then I believe she has another video coming out in the very near future that will really hone in on like that apples to apples comparison. And this all comes after a series of her other videos from the past. This is one of them. I killed this creationist argument, in which she's explored that statistical difference in the past. And so the thing is, she and I and others have pointed out the errors in those calculations many times over a period of several years. And yet, I guess it's really frustrating to see ICR, Answers in Genesis, as soon as this paper comes out. And then there's one article on Evolution News, which is an intelligent design article, that talks about this 15% number and talks about how, how shocking it was to the community, the scientific community, of which it was not shocking at all. And then all of a sudden, it's like we were right again. And the rounds of papers come out as if they didn't know about all this other backstory. It is exceedingly frustrating to see that kind of misinformation continue to be churned out by young earth creationist organizations. Okay, that's it. That's This Week in Creationism. Those are all the major stories that I could find. There's a bunch of things coming up in the next few weeks. I expect there to be some stories about the 100th anniversary of the Scopes monkey trial. I'm sure that each of the young earth creationist organizations will probably have something to say about that. I know that there are some speakers from some creationist organizations coming out into the area, not necessarily to Dayton, Ohio, where the Scopes trial was, but I believe there's something in Chattanooga and a few other places that, or at least they'll have articles on their websites about that. And I definitely want to review those and talk about how they frame that history of the Scopes trial and the subsequent 100 years since then. And I'm especially interested in it because I'll be giving a talk myself in Dayton, Tennessee, at the courthouse where the trial was held. And I'm giving a talk there during the 100th celebration of that. And that's something that I'm preparing right now. Once I've given that, I will probably record that particular talk separately, and I'll put it up here. That would probably be a month from now. All right, that's it. Thanks for hanging with me. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.